The shovel struck the polished black granite with a dull thud, a sound absorbed by the damp cemetery grass. A shock wave traveled up the wooden handle and into my arms, a familiar pain I had come to welcome over the past hour. White marble dust, fine as flour, clouded the air with each impact, settling on my clothes and in my hair. It coated my dark skin in a ghostly film as I worked with methodical fury to erase my own name from existence. She appeared without a sound, a silent figure standing just beyond the perimeter of my self-inflicted chaos. Her police uniform was crisply tailored, a dark navy that seemed to absorb the gray light of the afternoon, accentuating a lean, powerful frame. Her face was a placid mask, revealing nothing, and her dark eyes watched me without judgment or pity. She simply stood with her hands tucked into the pockets of her tactical pants, an unwavering observer to my private desecration. I did not stop under her gaze. Instead, I brought the shovel down one last time with all my strength, splitting the dates of my life in two. A quiet finality settled in the air as I let the tool fall from my numb fingers, and she moved forward with a fluid, unhurried grace. She never spoke a word as she took my wrists, the cold steel of the handcuffs biting into my skin through the layer of grime and stone dust. In that silent transaction, my chaotic freedom ended, and her complete control began. The back of the police cruiser smelled of antiseptic cleaner and the faint, unexpected scent of her perfume. It was something subtle and complex, notes of leather and bergamot that felt entirely out of place in this sterile cage. We drove in an unnerving silence, the city blurring past the wire mesh on the windows, and I could feel her presence in the front seat like a physical weight. She did not look back, but I knew I was the sole focus of her quiet, unnerving attention. Inside the station, the world became a series of sterile, impersonal procedures under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. The bright flash of a camera for a mugshot burned a white spot into my vision, and the thick black ink from my fingerprints felt like a final stain on my identity. Through it all, she remained nearby, a silent shepherd guiding me through my own debasement. She was the architect of this cold process, her authority absolute and unspoken as she moved me from one indignity to the next. The final door was a heavy slab of metal, and it clanged shut with an echoing finality that resonated deep in my bones. I was left on a cold metal bench in a concrete box that smelled of stale sweat and despair. She stood on the other side of the bars for a long moment, her dark eyes scanning me one last time from head to toe, as if committing the image to memory. Then she turned and walked away without a word, her footsteps receding down the empty hall, leaving me alone with the cold and the persistent, haunting scent of her perfume. The cell was a study in institutional despair, a concrete box designed to strip away everything but the slow, viscous passage of time. I sat on the edge of the thin, plastic-covered mattress, my hands resting on my knees, still faintly stained with the white dust of my own memorial. The air was cold and carried the sharp, chemical scent of disinfectant, a smell meant to erase the presence of all the bodies that had occupied this space before me. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, broken only by the distant, echoing clang of a far-off door or the shuffling feet of a guard on a mindless patrol. It was in that profound quiet that I first learned the sound of her walk. It was entirely different from the others, not a heavy, weary tread, but a light, almost silent rhythm of confidence and purpose. I heard her coming down the long corridor long before she appeared, each soft footfall a distinct note in the otherwise monotonous symphony of my confinement. My body tensed without my permission, a primal response to a predator I had not yet begun to understand. I remained perfectly still, tracking her approach by sound alone, my breath held tight in my chest. She did not stop at the bars of my cell door. Instead, the small, rectangular slot used for passing food trays scraped open with a sharp, metallic protest. Her face appeared in the opening, framed by the cold steel, a disembodied portrait in the dim corridor light. She had removed her uniform cap, and her dark hair was pulled back tightly, emphasizing the severe, elegant lines of her face and the unwavering intensity of her gaze. She simply looked at me for a long moment, her expression as unreadable as the scratches on the concrete walls around me. Then a stainless steel thermos appeared in the slot, pushed through the opening toward me. Steam ghosted from its lid, carrying with it the rich, dark aroma of freshly brewed coffee, a scent so profoundly out of place in this sterile world that it felt like a hallucination. It was an offering of warmth and life in a place defined by cold and stillness. My first instinct was suspicion, a deep-seated distrust of any kindness offered in a cage. But the scent was too powerful, too viscerally comforting to ignore completely. I rose from the cot and walked the few steps to the door, my movements slow and deliberate. My fingers were cold as I reached through the slot and took the thermos from her. It was surprisingly heavy in my hand, and the heat from the metal seeped into my skin, a startling and intensely pleasant sensation that sent a shiver through my entire body. I held it for a moment, letting the warmth spread through my palms, a simple, human feeling I hadn't realized I was so starved for. Unscrewing the lid, I took a tentative sip, the hot liquid a welcome shock against my lips. It was strong, bitter, and black, with no hint of sugar or cream to soften its edge. It was exactly how I had taken my coffee every morning for the past 20 years. The realization hit me not like a comfort, but like a cold dread. This was not a random act of mercy from a guard. This was a message, a demonstration of knowledge, a quiet assertion of a power that went far beyond the uniform she wore. I lowered the thermos and met her gaze through the narrow opening. She had not moved, her eyes still locked on me, watching for my reaction to her calculated gesture. In their dark depths, I saw not compassion, but a chillingly calm and focused intelligence. The air between us thickened, charged with a silent communication that was more intimate and terrifying than any spoken word. She knew me, and she was making sure I understood that fact completely. When I finished, I moved to pass the thermos back to her. It was a simple, mechanical action, but I infused it with intent. As she reached to take it, I let my fingers linger, allowing the tips to brush against the back of her hand. The contact was fleeting, lasting no more than a second, but it felt like a static charge leaping between us, a spark of forbidden energy in the cold, dead air of the prison. Her skin was smooth and cool, a stark contrast to the rough warmth of my own. She did not pull her hand back immediately. For a fraction of a second, she held perfectly still, her fingers frozen against mine. I saw something flicker in the depths of her impassive eyes, a brief, involuntary acknowledgement of the contact, a subtle widening of her pupils that betrayed the composure of her face. It was a small crack in her armor, but it was enough to confirm that she was not as untouchable as she appeared, that this strange, silent game was affecting her too. Then the moment was over. She took the thermos, her movements once again smooth and professional. Her face slid back into its unreadable mask as if the flicker of vulnerability had never happened at all. Without another glance, she closed the slot with a dull metallic click, plunging my cell back into its familiar gloom and silence. Her soft footsteps faded back down the corridor, leaving me alone once more. I returned to the cot, but the oppressive silence of the cell was different now. It was filled with the ghost of her presence, the lingering aroma of coffee, and the tingling sensation on my fingertips where our skin had met. The warmth from the coffee spread through my stomach, but it did little to combat the new kind of cold that was seeping into my bones. I finally understood that my punishment had not ended with the closing of the cell door. It had only just begun. The nights developed a new rhythm, one dictated not by the prison schedule, but by a silent, mutual anticipation. After the final, echoing clang of the midnight lockdown, a profound quiet would settle over the cell block, and I would wait. I learned to listen for the subtle sound of her approach, a ghost in the corridor whose presence I could feel long before I could see her through the bars. The coffee was a singular event. She never brought it again. Her visits were now about something else entirely, something raw and undefined that hung in the air between us. She would appear in the dim security lighting, a silhouette of authority and control, and simply stand before my cell. For what felt like hours, she would just watch me, her face an unreadable mask, her posture relaxed but alert. These silent vigils were a strange and unnerving form of communication, a battle of wills conducted in absolute stillness. Her gaze was heavy, an almost physical pressure that sought to dissect me, to peel back the layers of my composure and see the broken parts I kept hidden. I refused to grant her the power of being the sole observer in this silent theater. I would rise from my cot and stand at the bars, meeting her stare with one of my own. I did not look away, did not flinch, did not give her the satisfaction of seeing any fear. We would stand there, separated by mere inches and a universe of circumstance, locked in a contest of endurance. The cell, my world of concrete and steel, became an arena for this nightly confrontation, a space charged with an electric, unspoken tension. Then, one night, the dynamic shifted. Instead of standing over me in a position of authority, she slowly crouched down, bringing her face level with the height of my cot. The act of lowering herself felt momentous, a deliberate shedding of her role as guard and an assumption of something more personal, more vulnerable. From this new angle, her eyes seemed larger, darker, and the professional mask she wore so well seemed to show the faintest of cracks around the edges. It was a concession, an invitation to a different kind of engagement. Her hand came to rest on the bars separating us, a casual gesture that was anything but. Her long, elegant fingers curled around the rusted, cold iron, her knuckles pale under the dim light. The contrast of her smooth, living skin against the inanimate, decaying steel was stark and strangely beautiful. The gesture was an offering, a bridge across the chasm that separated our worlds, and I knew that my response would define everything that came next. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I rose from the cot and made the pilgrimage of only 3 steps to the door, each movement feeling deliberate and heavy with significance. The air crackled with anticipation as I stopped directly in front of her. I mirrored her action, placing my own hand on the bars, my palm flat against the cold metal just inches from her fingers. We stayed like that for a long moment, our hands separated by the grid of steel, our breaths ghosting in the chilly air. Then, with infinite slowness, her fingers uncurled from the bar and slid through the 4-inch gap. It was a breathtaking breach of every rule, a transgression that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I met her gesture, sliding my own fingers through the space until they met hers. It was an impossible intimacy, a connection forged through the very object meant to ensure our separation, the cold steel, a witness to our silent crime. The simple act of holding hands became a profound exploration. Her skin was softer than I had imagined, her grip surprisingly strong, her fingers interlacing with mine as if they had been shaped for it. I turned her hand over, tracing the lines of her palm with my thumb, a gesture of profound possession and curiosity. I lifted her hand to my face, inhaling the scent from her skin, that same faint, intoxicating perfume of leather and bergamot, but now mingled with her own unique human warmth. Our faces drew closer, pulled by an irresistible gravity, until our foreheads rested against the cold bars. The kiss was a clumsy, desperate thing, hampered by the steel that pressed into our cheeks and lips. It was more a pressing of mouths than a true kiss, a frantic attempt to erase the barrier between us. The taste of her was a complex mixture of her cherry red lipstick, the faint saltiness of her skin, and the cold metallic tang of the bars themselves. We pulled back, the spell broken, the only sound the harsh rasp of our own breathing echoing in the silent corridor. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the aftermath of the kiss reflected in her eyes. The professional mask was gone, shattered, and in its place was a raw, undisguised desire, mingled with a fear that mirrored my own. I saw the uniform fall away, and for the first time, I saw the woman inside it, a woman who was just as lost in this as I was. She stood abruptly, her movements jerky and uncertain. She took a step back from the bars, her hand falling away from mine, leaving my skin feeling cold and empty. She did not look at me again as she turned and walked quickly away, her footsteps faster now, less confident, the sound of a retreat rather than a departure. The corridor swallowed her figure, and I was left alone again. Alone. I brought my own fingers to my lips, the taste of her and the cold of the steel still lingering there. The cell was no longer just a cage. It had been irrevocably transformed. It was now a sanctuary, a secret space, where the rules of the outside world were suspended, a confessional where our sins were not spoken but felt. I was her prisoner, yes, but in that kiss, through those bars, she had become mine as well. The transfer was unexpected, a silent shuffling of my existence from one concrete box to another. This new cell was in a quieter wing of the prison, designated for solitary confinement, though I had committed no new infraction to warrant it. It was slightly larger, cleaner, and had a single high window, a narrow slash of reinforced glass that offered a sliver of the night sky, a view of stars I had not realized I missed. I lay on the cot that first night, tracing the constellations in my mind, a profound sense of dislocation settling over me as I waited for a rhythm that I no longer knew. I did not have to wait long. The sound was different this time, not the scrape of a food slot, but the soft metallic click of a key turning in the main lock. My heart seized in my chest, a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs, as the heavy door swung inward with a barely audible sigh. She stood there, silhouetted for a moment against the dim light of the corridor, before stepping inside and closing the door behind her, sealing us together in the sudden, absolute privacy of the cell. The sound of the lock re-engaging was deafening in the silence. She was still in full uniform, the crisp navy fabric and polished leather, a stark, official presence in my small gray world. Between us, the air was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like a third entity in the room, a silent witness to this monumental breach of protocol. She did not move, did not speak, simply stood with her back to the door, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that seemed to strip the very air from my lungs. The game had changed, the rules had been discarded, and I had no idea what came next. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace, she began the ritual. Her fingers went to the top button of her uniform shirt, and she undid it, then the next, and the next. The fabric parted, revealing the plain black undershirt she wore beneath, a stark contrast to the decorated and authoritative exterior. Her movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, and I watched, mesmerized, as she methodically stripped away the symbols of her power, transforming herself from an officer of the law into something else, something vulnerable and unknown. The shirt was shrugged from her shoulders and folded with a practiced neatness before being placed on the small built-in desk. Next came the heavy leather belt, laden with the architecture of her authority, handcuffs, a radio, and the cold, deadly weight of her holstered firearm. She unbuckled it, the sound of the leather creaking in the silence, and coiled it carefully, placing the entire apparatus on top of the folded shirt. It was an act of profound trust, or profound recklessness, a surrender of her power that left me breathless. Stripped to her undershirt and tactical pants, she finally moved away from the door. She crossed the small space between us and then did something I never could have anticipated. She sank to her knees on the cold concrete floor before me. Her hands came to rest on my thighs, her touch a searing heat through the rough fabric of my prison-issued jumpsuit. She knelt before me, her prisoner, and looked up, her face a maelstrom of emotions I could not begin to decipher, a silent question and a command all at once. My hand, seemingly of its own accord, rose to her head. My fingers trembled as I carefully pulled the pins from her hair, undoing the severe, tight bun she always wore. A cascade of dark, coiled hair tumbled free, falling around her shoulders, framing her face and softening the hard lines of her authority. It was an act of incredible intimacy, this gentle dismantling of her public self, and I felt a wave of something possessive and fiercely protective wash over me. Her head tilted back, a silent invitation, and I leaned down to meet her. The kiss was nothing like the frantic, desperate pressing through the bars. This was a deep, consuming exploration, a languid claiming. Her lips were soft and yielding, parting under the pressure of mine, and the taste of her was intoxicating, free of the metallic tang of steel. Her hands slid from my thighs to my waist, pulling me closer until I slipped from the cot to kneel with her on the floor. I pushed her undershirt up, my hands greedy to feel the skin beneath. Her body was a landscape of contradictions. The smooth, warm skin stretched over hard, disciplined muscle. The moonlight from the high window caught the curve of her shoulder, painting her in shades of silver and shadow. This was not a surrender. It was a collision, a meeting of two forces in the vacuum of this cell, where the rules of the world outside ceased to exist. We moved to the narrow cot, a tangle of limbs and breathless sighs. The rough fabric of my jumpsuit was an abrasive friction against her bare skin, a constant reminder of who and where we were. Her hands were not gentle. They were demanding, exploring, learning the shape of me with an urgent curiosity. It was a silent, desperate language spoken by touch alone. Each caress a confession, each kiss a transgression that bound us tighter together. The pleasure, when it came, was a quiet, violent thing, a shared tremor that shook both of our bodies and left us clinging to one another in the aftermath. We lay in the sliver of moonlight, our breathing slowly returning to normal, her head resting on my chest, her hair a soft cloud against my skin. In the quiet intimacy of that moment, the roles of prisoner and guard dissolved completely, leaving only the undeniable truth of our two bodies entwined in the darkness. She left as silently as she had arrived. Rising from the cot, she dressed with the same deliberate care she had shown when undressing, each piece of her uniform methodically put back in place, rebuilding the wall between us. She did not look at me as she pinned her hair back up, her face once again settling into a familiar, impassive mask. When she was fully assembled, an officer once more, she gave me one last long look, her eyes holding a new and dangerous depth. Then she was gone, the click of the lock a final definitive punctuation mark on the night. I was alone, but the cell was no longer empty. It was filled with the scent of her skin and the impossible, undeniable memory of her surrender. I awoke to the cold, gray light of dawn filtering through the high window, a stark and unwelcome intrusion into the lingering warmth of the night. She was gone, of course, a phantom who visited only under the cover of darkness. The cell was silent and empty, yet her presence remained, a ghost imprinted on the very air I breathed, a lingering scent of her perfume and skin on the thin prison mattress. I touched my own lips, the memory of her taste still a vivid sensation, a secret brand that marked me as hers. Later that morning, 2 different guards, men whose faces I did not recognize, came for me. Their movements were impersonal and efficient as they unlocked my cell and escorted me down the now familiar corridors. I expected to be returned to the general population for my brief, strange sojourn in solitary to end, but instead they led me toward the administrative section of the prison, a place I had not seen since my initial processing. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. This deviation from the routine felt ominous, a sign that the game had changed once more. I was brought into a small, windowless office and left alone. A few minutes later, a harried-looking man in a cheap suit entered, carrying a file overflowing with papers. He introduced himself as my public defender, a man I had never met nor spoken to before. He did not make eye contact as he shuffled through the paperwork, explaining in a monotone drone that the charges against me, felony vandalism of a gravesite, were being summarily dismissed. He spoke of procedural errors, of a lack of evidence, of the prosecuting attorney's heavy caseload. It was a litany of bureaucratic excuses that meant nothing to me, a smokescreen of official language designed to obscure the truth. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this had nothing to do with justice or the law. This was her, moving unseen pieces on a board only she could see, manipulating the system from the inside for reasons I could not begin to fathom. The process of my release was a disorienting blur of signatures and echoing hallways. I was handed a plastic bag containing the clothes I had been arrested in, still faintly dusted with the white powder of my own gravestone. Changing out of the rough prison jumpsuit felt like shedding a skin, a physical transformation back into a person the world might recognize. Yet, as I stood in the small changing room, I felt more like a stranger to myself than ever before. Walking out of the main entrance of the police station and into the brilliant, blinding light of an autumn afternoon was a physical shock. The city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, the murmur of conversations crashed over me, an overwhelming sensory assault after the profound quiet of my confinement. I had to stop for a moment, my hand shielding my eyes against the sun as I tried to reorient myself in a world that now felt alien and impossibly vast. That was when I saw her. She was leaning against the side of a nondescript black sedan parked across the street, a silent, still point in the chaotic flow of the city. She was out of uniform, dressed in simple dark jeans and a fitted leather jacket, a civilian disguise that somehow made her seem more dangerous, more potent than she had in full uniform. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and she watched me with that same unnerving, unreadable intensity. A powerful current seemed to flow between us, pulling me forward. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me across the street, my heart pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. The noise of the city faded into a dull roar, my entire universe narrowing to the space between myself and this woman who had been my captor, my confessor, and my lover. The future, a concept I had tried to physically destroy just days before, suddenly felt not only possible, but achingly, terrifyingly real, its shape entirely dependent on the woman waiting for me. I closed the final few feet between us, my body moving as if pulled by a magnetic force, my entire world narrowed to her still form. The chaos of the city, the glare of the sun, the feeling of freedom, it all faded into a distant hum, secondary to the profound and terrifying hope that was blooming in my chest. This moment felt like a hinge point in my life, a pivot from a past I had tried to erase toward a future I had thought impossible, a future that began and ended with her. When I finally stood before her, close enough to see the faint, almost imperceptible scar above her left eyebrow, she did not move. She did not smile, did not unfold her arms, did not offer any gesture of welcome or acknowledgement. Her dark eyes were not fixed on me, as I had expected, but on a point somewhere over my shoulder, as if I were a ghost she was looking straight through. Her expression was a perfect, placid blank, the same unnerving calm she had projected during my arrest, and a cold tendril of uncertainty began to snake its way around my heart. Then, behind me, the passenger door of the black sedan opened with a soft click. The sound was quiet, almost lost in the city's noise, but it felt like a gunshot in the tense silence between us. I turned slowly, a sense of dreamlike dread washing over me as a figure began to emerge from the car's interior. It was an older woman, elegantly dressed in a dark coat, her movements stiff and deliberate, her face a mask of cold, preserved hatred that I recognized with a sickening, violent jolt. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the ground shifting beneath my feet. It was her, the wife, the woman whose life, whose marriage I had destroyed all those years ago, a face I had spent the better part of a decade trying to forget, a ghost I had tried to pulverize into dust on that granite headstone. The past I had tried to so violently bury was standing before me, impeccably dressed and radiating a loathing so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. I whipped my head back to the younger woman, my mind frantically, desperately trying to reject the truth that was assembling itself with horrifying clarity. It was then that she finally moved. She slowly raised a hand, not to me, but to her own face, her index finger lightly tracing the outline of her lips in a gesture that was a cruel, mocking echo of our stolen intimacy in the dark. And then she smiled. It was not a smile of warmth or affection. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever seen. It was wide and sharp, a predator's smile that did not touch her cold, dark eyes, revealing a perfect row of white teeth. It was a smile of absolute triumphant cruelty, a final, devastating revelation that laid the entire, intricate, monstrous architecture of her deception bare. In that one expression, I saw the full scope of her calculated performance, the chilling purpose behind every touch, every glance, every shared silence. The hope that had bloomed in my chest just moments before withered and turned to a toxic ash. Every intimate moment, every whispered confession made through steel bars, every secret touch in the moonlit cell had been a meticulously crafted lie, a weapon designed to build me up only to shatter me more completely. I was not a lover. I was a project. I was not a person she desired. I was an object of a long, simmering, generational vengeance. My gaze drifted back to the two of them, now standing side by side on the pavement. The daughter's hand came to rest on her mother's arm, a gesture of support and shared victory. A look of perfect, silent understanding passed between them, the shared glance of two hunters who had successfully run their prey to ground. They were a single, complete entity of vengeance, and I had walked willingly, eagerly into the center of their trap, mistaking the bait for salvation.